On a hot summer night in 1947, something crashes in the darkness, scattering debris across a remote ranch and igniting a chain of events that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the stars, our government, and perhaps even ourselves. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. So right off the bat, I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. This topic is huge. There are dozens of books out there with different updated details. Much to my chagrin, I have a limited amount of time, so think of it more as a very detailed primer. However, I do have to tease that if you stay to the end, you'll discover why the strangeness in Roswell didn't stop in 1947. And you won't hear this story anywhere else. Can't say I've cracked the case or anything like that, but it's just a little extra flavor for the stew, if you will. The summer of 1947 was a little schizophrenic for the United States. Most of the country was still trying to sleep off the hangover from our victory celebrations from winning the war less than 2 years earlier. I mean, not only did we win, but we were now the undisputed top dog. But with great power comes great paranoia. The maids weren't even done sweeping up after the after party before the kids were back at it, picking fights on the global playground, which made the atmosphere at the Roswell Army Airfield, or RAAF, in New Mexico rather bipolar. On the one hand, the RAAF was the home of the 509th Bomb Group, the elite unit that had dropped those atomic payloads on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These guys were the best of the best, and the only group entrusted and trained to handle nuclear cargo. On the other hand, now that World War II was over, this was also the place where any new tech that had been in the hands of the Axis that we could recover was sent for study. And we were coming to the sobering conclusion that they had some pretty good stuff on their side, like the German V-2 rocket and the Horton-Ho 229, a crescent-shaped jet that could slip under the radar and strike without warning. Captured plans suggested the Soviets might have built their own versions and might even be trying to snoop out our nuclear secrets. The 509th is now a prime target. And now that temperatures were starting to chill on the world stage already, we could not let our guard down even for a second. So imagine the mental state of the regular Roswell resident, beaming with pride at being the home of the heroic 509th, but also knowing that they are now pretty much ground zero for any future attacks. Imagine what it was like to read the newspaper every day, flipping between stories of how great we are next to stories about how everyone's now out to get us. That might make you a little nuts. And just think, it's even worse today. And sometimes headlines that are completely opposite of each other appear on the same day. Well, which one should we listen to? This is exactly why we use Ground News, the sponsor of this episode. They don't write the news. They collect the stories into one place so you can see how the same story is covered across dozens of outlets. You can line up the headlines side by side, check the political leanings of each source, see who owns them, see how many sources are actually covering the story, and check the information's factuality to gauge reliability, all helping you build a fuller picture and avoid being trapped inside an echo chamber. Take this recent story about the 3I Atlas comet that's swinging through our solar system right now. One outlet paints a terrifying picture with the headline, "Mysterious interstellar object hurtling through solar system could be as big as Manhattan." While another headline, "Interstellar comet full of mysterious materials swinging past Mars," makes it sound like a slightly provocative celestial body out for a Sunday stroll. Same story, two very different impressions. Ground News makes those differences clear, so you're not stuck in just one version of the narrative. What I appreciate most about Ground News is that they don't pretend bias doesn't exist. They help you spot it and understand it. That way, you're the one deciding what to believe. So if you want a clearer view of today's headlines, go to our special link, groundnews.com/TIB. Just click on the link in the description or use the QR code on screen to get 40% off the Vantage plan for unlimited access. Now that we have Ground News to help clarify today's news, let's go back to New Mexico and see if we can figure out what the truth is there. It was into this emotional whirlwind that the modern UFO era of flying saucers exploded with the June 24th, 1947 sighting by Kenneth Arnold of 9 discs skipping over Mount Rainier in Washington state. The world around us was changing fast. Now, the Roswell incident didn't erupt in a single tidy moment. It unraveled over a long, lightning-streaked holiday weekend. Starting around the last week of June, so just like a week or so after Kenneth Arnold's sighting hit the papers, radar operators at Roswell Army Airfield, White Sands, and the Alamogordo bombing range began picking up anomalies. Blips that moved too fast for any known aircraft, clocking speeds up to 1,700 miles per hour, executing sharp turns that would shred a human-piloted plane, and vanishing only to reappear miles away in seconds. These weren't one-offs. These things would hang around for hours, sometimes mimicking tight formations before scattering. Radar techs methodically disassembled the equipment, hunting for bad vacuum tubes or wiring, but no luck. The radars were telling the truth, but no one outside the military had a clue, including Dan and Mary Wilmot. It's the evening of Wednesday, July 2nd. As the sun's going down, Dan and Mary settle on their porch in Roswell for the evening ritual of sipping coffee and watching the world wind down. It's a quiet night with the only real sound the distant rumble of thunder from a storm moving in. Then, from the southeast, comes an elongated egg about 20 feet long, glowing with a soft uniform light. It flies low, like maybe 500 feet up, at a speed Mary later guesses at 400 miles an hour, silent as a ghost and leaving no vapor trail. It crosses their view in seconds, vanishing into the night. The Wilmots debate calling the sheriff, but hold off, figuring it's gotta be some top secret test flight from the base. But they certainly are not the only ones who see something strange in the desert skies. At roughly the same time, Steve Robinson is in his milk delivery truck out on a stretch of highway just north of town when he sees an oval-shaped light streak low over his truck. He watches it move toward the horizon, heading toward the northeast, thinking he has never seen something move that fast in his entire life. By morning, Sheriff George Wilcox's phone is ringing off the hook. Farmers spotting lights weaving through the clouds. A night watchman at a local mill claiming one hovered over the building for several minutes before darting away. George dutifully takes down all of the information, but is thinking that the airbase must be testing something new. But still, that's a lot of calls. The next night, July 3rd, an archaeological team led by Dr. W. Curry Holden is wrapping up a dig near Blackwater Draw, just a few miles to the west of Roswell, when they notice odd lights hovering to the north, steady, unblinking orbs that drift for 20 minutes before blinking out. Holden, a respected professor from Texas Tech, adds the sighting to his field notes as possible aircraft malfunction, but knows that's not quite right. The lights move too deliberately, too silently to be regular planes. Friday, July 4th, the start of the Independence Day holiday, dawns hot and hazy. So it's not a big surprise that as evening comes around, a massive thunderstorm rolls in from the west, turning the sky into a crackling light show. At the Foster Ranch, 75 miles northwest of Roswell, ranch foreman Mac Brazel is inside with his family when the storm hits. Around 11:30 p.m., a deafening roar cuts through the wind, more like a derailing freight train than thunder. Mac steps onto the porch, squinting into the flashing dark, but sees nothing but rain-lashed scrub. The next morning, July 5th, Mac rises with the sun, saddling up with Bill Proctor, the son of his friends and neighbors Floyd and Loretta Proctor, to check on his 400-head sheep herd scattered across the Foster Ranch's 480 acres. What he finds stops him cold. A debris field roughly 200 to 300 yards wide and 3/4 of a mile long, covering several acres. It isn't the usual wind-tossed junk, balloons or survey markers, but something else entirely. There are sheets of thin foil, almost like today's Mylar balloons, impossibly light and super strong, but it can't be a Mylar balloon. They didn't become a thing until the 70s. He finds I-beams 12 to 18 inches long, as light as balsa wood, but etched with strange, flowing purple symbols that look like a mix of hieroglyphics and circuit diagrams, and flexible struts like rubberized wood, all scattered in a path wide enough to freak out his sheep. He fills a shoebox full of the stuff and finishes getting his sheep to water. Also, early that morning, Sheriff Wilcox gets a call, but it's not from Mac Brazel. It's from a student who's part of Dr. Holden's team of archaeologists out around Blackwater Draw, around 60 miles southeast of the Foster Ranch. The night before, around the same time Mac heard his booming noise, the student's team also heard a loud boom and sees something streak across the sky. They don't know for sure what it is, but think maybe it's a downed airplane? But they're quite a ways from a phone, so they just let it be. However, when they get to their dig site early that morning, they find the ground wrecked by a 25-foot-long plow line leading to the twisted remnants of a craft about 12 to 15 feet long and 6 feet high. It was egg-shaped with a seamless metallic hull that gleamed dully. No rivets, no wings, no landing gear, just a split open seam revealing dark interior compartments. On the ground lay small, charred figures, 2 outside the wreck, 1 seemingly pinned inside, each about 3 to 4 feet tall, with big heads and skinny arms and legs. A 4th figure, same kind of creature, is just walking around the debris, a little dazed and confused, its large black eyes somehow communicating a profound sorrow. One of the students takes off to find the nearest phone and calls Sheriff Wilcox, telling him, "You better get out here right now." So George Wilcox, operating under the logical assumption that it must be a plane crash, makes a call to the Roswell Fire Department to get them out to the area as soon as possible. Fire Chief Dan Dwyer's crew rolls out around 9:30 a.m., slowly navigating the rutted desert roads, reaching Blackwater about 10 a.m. But they're not even close to being the first ones on the scene. Not only is the student group there, but a good number of locals as well, all seeing what Dan's seeing. A crashed flying saucer, 3 dead aliens, and a 4th one wandering around like it's in shock. Dan describes them as being the size of a 10-year-old, but with heads too big for their bodies, large eyes, no hair, and skin like gray rubber. But the fire department is also not the last ones on the scene either. It doesn't take long before a convoy of army trucks comes rolling up on the carnage with a seemingly endless supply of MPs in olive drab spilling out with rifles at the ready. The bodies are taken to the base hospital for examination. Herbert Ellis, a civilian contractor painting at the base hospital, caught a glimpse through a side door. One figure walking unassisted between 2 MPs, its steps unsteady but deliberate, while 3 others lay on gurneys, pale and still under sheets. Dr. Jesse Johnson pronounces 3 of them dead. Glenn Dennis, the mortician working at the Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell, receives a call from the base mortuary officer who asks him about small caskets. Then he receives another call from downtown Roswell where an airman has been injured. The funeral home where Dennis works also operates an ambulance service, so Dennis scoops up the injured airman and drives him to the base, is waved through the gate, and stops at the rear of the base hospital. Parked behind the hospital and at the loading dock and in front of the emergency room are 3 ambulances, some with their back doors open, and Dennis can see strange-looking debris. Inside the base hospital, Dennis is confronted by 2 officers. A red-haired captain tells Dennis that he has seen nothing and heard nothing.
I know nothing. Nothing.
If he opens his mouth, they will be picking his bones out of the sand. Meanwhile, after he's done with his ranch duties, Mac Brazel takes a few scraps of the material and goes to see his neighbors, Floyd and Loretta Proctor. He shows them a piece of the material, and between Mac and Floyd, they try burning and cutting it with no luck. the proctors suggest he take it into town and show the sheriff. Later that night, the deceased alien bodies are sealed into a long crate, which is taken to a hangar. It's left there overnight with spotlights on it while MPs stand guard around it. The next morning, Sunday, July 6th, Sheriff George is back in his office bright and early when Mac Brazel strolls through the door with his shoebox of debris to show him. Takes out a piece of the foil-looking stuff and shows George just how you can crinkle it in your hand, but as soon as you let it go, it snaps right back to being perfectly smooth. George looks at the magic foil and says, "Wow," and puts in a call to Colonel Blanchard at Roswell Army Airfield. You guys might want to have a look at this." Colonel Blanchard tells Major Jesse A. Marcel, the base's intelligence officer, to head over to the sheriff's office and find out what is going on. So Major Marcel heads over to see Sheriff George and Mac. Mac shows Jesse the strange foil. Jesse's like, "Wow." And he takes some of it back to the base to show Colonel Blanchard, who's like, "Wow." Jesse then grabs his assistant, Counterintelligence Corps Sergeant Sheridan Cavett, and heads back to the sheriff's office. Spend a little bit more time interviewing Mac, and then tell him, "Show us." And the whole crew heads back to Foster Ranch. Unfortunately, between the distance and the crappy roads, they don't get there until after dark, so they have to spend the night at an old ranch house close to the debris field, eating cold beans and waiting for daylight. In the meantime, Colonel Blanchard put in a call to one of his higher-ups, Major General Clements McMullen, to tell him about the weird foil. Major General McMullen says, "Get me some of that stuff." So Colonel Blanchard gets some of the stuff from the sheriff's office, which is then sealed in a courier pouch to go to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., along with the crashed ship and the bodies. That flight leaves Roswell at 2 a.m. on Monday the 7th. Later that morning, Mac takes Jesse Marcel and Cavett out to the debris field. They walk the perimeter of the field for a while, and then drive around for a bit longer just to make sure that they aren't missing anything like another crash site, but they don't find anything. So they return to the original debris site and spend the rest of the day collecting debris. They load the rear of Jesse's car and then the Jeep driven by Cavett. It's starting to get dark before they begin the trip back to Roswell. It's about 2 a.m. before Jesse gets back to his house. In his excitement, he brings a box of the funky foil into the house, scatters it all over the kitchen floor, and wakes up his wife and 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr., saying, "Wake up, you guys. You gotta see this." For the next hour, they play around with the debris on the kitchen floor. Jesse Jr. studies an I-beam fragment, tracing the hieroglyphic etchings with wide eyes. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, light as a feather, but when Dad tried to bend it with the pliers, it just sprang back. No mark. The funny thing is, Jesse's not breaking regulations because none of it has yet been officially classified. With the help of his son, Jesse loads it all back into the car to go back to the base. He and Cavett are back at the base briefing Blanchard by 6 a.m. And at the morning staff meeting, some of the debris is passed around the table for everyone there to check out while Jesse briefs the room on what they saw the day before. The big question they need to answer is, do we tell the public? Colonel Blanchard's boss, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas J. Dubose, who both flew in from Fort Worth Army Airfield, are also in the meeting. General Ramey suggests they do tell the public about the debris field find in order to take attention away from the real crash site that's had way too much attention already. So by 11 a.m., Blanchard gives the green light to his public information officer, First Lieutenant Walter Haut, to craft a press release. At 2:26 p.m., Haut wires it to the Associated Press. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. The story hit the wire like a bomb. By evening, it dominated the front pages from the Roswell Daily Record to the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times. The base's switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree, and for a brief, exhilarating moment, Roswell was the center of the universe. At 3 p.m., Jesse Marcel is told, "You're going to Fort Worth." So he gets on a plane with some of the debris, and presumably General Ramey and Colonel Dubose as well, as that's where they're from. Once they're back on the ground, Jesse finds himself in General Ramey's office with the debris they brought. Ramey tells Jesse, "Show me where you found it." And the two walk down the hall to the map room. When they return, the debris is gone, replaced with a bunch of janky, ripped up pieces of weather balloons scattered on the floor. General Ramey had gotten the word from the higher-ups, "Make this go away." So before you can say, "Cover up," Jesse finds himself in front of a room of reporters wearing his best poker face as Ramey and Dubose stand there telling the press, "See, it's just a weather balloon," as they all pose for pictures with the fake wreckage. The reporters bite hook, line, and sinker, and the word spreads from on high that it was all just a big mistake. But for ufologists everywhere, it was General Ramey who made the mistake. But we'll dive deeper into that in a minute. Meanwhile, Mac Brazel, who had stayed the night in town with his friend Walt Whitmore, co-owner of KGFL Radio, does a pre-recorded interview for the station, telling them everything that he saw and experienced before he is invited to the base for 4 days. With no use of a phone, no access to the outside world, round after round of questioning and intimidation. By the time he sees daylight again, his story has amazingly done a 180. His quote to the press who are lined up to greet him is, "I am sure that what I found was not any sort of flying disc, but I did get carried away with the first excitement and got too high with my windmill. It was just some rubber strips, tinfoil, and balsa wood and tough paper. I regret having caused all this excitement." And while Mac is enjoying his stay at the RAAF Inn and Suites, the FCC calls the radio station and tells them, "If you air that little interview you got with Brazel, we will yank your license." Debriefings kick off in Hangar 84 that afternoon. Witnesses are herded into small groups onto the fluorescent hum.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, look right here.
Military personnel are sternly reminded of their oaths of secrecy, branded with threats of court-martial or worse for any leak. Civilians get an even blunter version. Warnings of treason charges, family repercussions, or simply disappearance into the vast desert. By July 9th, the perimeter comes down, patrols pull back, and Roswell exhales, the town returning to its rhythm of dusty streets and Friday night dances. Now, is this timeline perfect? Not even close. There are so many people who, over the last almost 80 years, have changed little bits in their statements that it's nearly impossible to nail it down. Not to mention the fact that some people believe there is only one crash site on the Foster Ranch. But some people believe that there are two, that the craft actually hit the ground once, shedding the material that Mac Brazel found, bounced up, and actually crashed for real at the Blackwater Draw site. So, considering the hundreds of data points that often conflict with one another, I did my best to try to weave a thread through what made the most sense. In the years that followed, nobody really paid attention to the Roswell incident. The Air Force's Project Blue Book, their official probe into the UFO phenomena, lumped Roswell in as a misidentified balloon, not diving any deeper and ignoring any details to the contrary. But the stonewall from the inside and the complacency on the outside held. Until two things happened. First, a ufologist named Stanton Friedman asked Jesse Marcel for an interview. And second, Jesse said yes. Stanton Friedman was a nuclear physicist turned pioneering ufologist. In 1978, Friedman received a tip from a television producer friend about Jesse Marcel, the Army intelligence officer who had handled the debris 3 decades earlier. Their interview marked the first time Jesse publicly described the crash site material as not of this earth, igniting a fire in Stanton that is heretofore unknown. He heads to Roswell later that year and meticulously documents the crash site, interviews over 100 witnesses, and after collecting information over the next 14 years, co-authors a book called Crash at Corona in 1992 with Don Berliner, which builds a case for an extraterrestrial craft and government cover-up that challenges the company line. Stanton's countless lectures and congressional testimonies brought the subject of Roswell into the public square, pressuring the Air Force for some answers. So the Air Force responds with the report in 1994 titled The Roswell Report: Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. Here, the balloon got an upgrade. Now their story is that it wasn't just a run-of-the-mill weather balloon, but part of Project Mogul, a top-secret program to float microphone arrays on balloon trains up to 100,000 feet high, listening for Soviet atomic tests via sound waves bouncing off the ionosphere. The missing Flight 4 from June 4th, 1947, allegedly drifted to the Foster Ranch. And the boys of the 509th didn't know about it because they didn't need to know about it. But how does a light, floaty weather balloon with a microphone cause a huge gouge in the dirt and burn marks? It doesn't. The Air Force must have gotten a little tired of the sound of everyone laughing at them because in 1997, they take another crack at it with their follow-up report, the Roswell Report. Case closed. Ooh, they sound a little mad. This time, they actually tackle the reports of alien bodies by attributing the sightings to time compression, which is government speak for a bad timeline. Their idea is that eyewitnesses blended the 1947 crash with memories of Operation High Dive, a 1953 to 1959 program that dropped crash test dummies from high-altitude balloons to test parachutes. Seriously? Project High Dive started 6 years after Roswell, and the dummies were full size. I doubt there is any confusion between the two. Stanton Friedman immediately called out both reports as the Air Force attempting to whitewash the entire event. And frankly, it was too little too late for the Air Force. By 1997, the investigative work done by Stanton and the others had cracked open the door too far for the Air Force to fill it. The problem is, this case is so big with so many moving parts that it's hard to even tell it. Nobody saw everything. So we have to kind of take each detail and put it all together like a mosaic. And this puzzle has a lot of pieces. Accounts from upwards of 100 different people or more, ordinary people like ranchers and nurses and firefighters, who each hold a separate piece. First, let's talk about those people who were witness to the magic foil. It's estimated that at least 4 dozen people touched that foil material. Everyone from Mac Brazel and his family, his neighbors, the Proctors, Jesse Marcel and his family, everyone at the staff meeting the next day, not to mention everyone up the chain of command from there. And don't forget about all the soldiers who combed the field picking up debris. That debris field was 200 to 300 yards wide by another 500 yards long and looked like the aftermath of a high-tech piñata gone wrong. I can't even imagine how many people they had to truck in to clean that up. Then there's the testimony of Frankie Rowe, who was 12 when this whole thing went down. Frankie is the daughter of Dan Dwyer, the fire chief whose crew responded to the crash site. She had tagged along with her dad after a doctor's visit later in that afternoon, munching ice chips in the kitchen of the fire station while the crew decompressed from the Blackwater call. Around 3 p.m., a state trooper buddy of the firefighters swings by all excited. "You guys missed something out there?" He pulls a small, wadded silver piece from his pocket, a fragment he'd palmed during the debris pickup. He drops it on the table, and it unfurls like liquid, flat and flawless. The men crowd in, passing it around, crumpling it, burning it, cutting it, but nothing leaving even the tiniest scratch. Frankie perched on a stool, reaches for it during a lull, playing with it for like 5 minutes straight.
When you would wad it up in your hand, you couldn't feel it in your hand. You couldn't feel you had anything there. And it would go to a size that was so small that you'd have to look to see if it was still in your hand.
The trooper eventually stuck it back in his pocket, joking about getting caught, but Frankie never forgot. But let's stop trying to even count how many hands touch the freaky foil and talk about the bodies. The body encounters are fewer and more guarded, with MPs forming human walls around the sites and hangars. But the descriptions that slip through are remarkably uniform. They were small, 34 feet tall and 40 to 50 pounds at most, with pear-shaped heads 18 to 24 inches across, grayish rubbery skin, bald scalps, and faces dominated by large almond-shaped black eyes without visible pupils, slit nostrils and lipless mouths, 4 long fingers per hand, wearing one-piece suits of metallic cloth that clung without wrinkles. No blood pooled from injuries, no real smell, just a faint, sweet chemical scent like ozone mixed with flowers. Either 3 or 4 were deceased, and one survivor staggered about, exuding what witnesses described as an almost tangible sorrow. The archaeology gang were, of course, the first on the scene, so you would think we would have the best descriptions from them. But I can't find any information about them. That doesn't bode well for our investigation, but they are not the only ones who saw them. Dan Dwyer, the fire chief, led the first official response to Blackwater Draw, his crew arriving early that morning. Later that night, as Dan's family is all gathered around the table for dinner, he tells them all about what he saw that day. Frankie remembers her dad being so excited as he told him that these things had no hair, gray skin that looked rubbery, and you could see they weren't built like us. No ears, just slits for a nose and a mouth. The one that was moving was sad, like it knew what had happened to the others, and it was deeply hurt. Before they could do anything really, the MPs arrive, barking orders to stand down. Dan's guys back off and head back to the station. So he really didn't have much else to say, except to make sure that he told his children that there is another life out in the universe. And that we would be smug to think that if God created us, that he couldn't have created other life as well. Okay, so it makes sense that any bodies recovered would first be taken to the base hospital, right? Well, remember Herbert Ellis, the painter who saw them walking in the hospital? Okay, so we have a witness putting him at the hospital that day. And as chance would have it, Herbert's wife, Eula May, also happens to be friends with Frankie's mom. So the next day, July 6th, Frankie overhears her mom talking with Eula May over tea, with the two of them comparing the descriptions from each of their husbands. And we have Glenn Dennis, the 22-year-old mortician who got looped in because of a frantic call from the base hospital asking for child-sized caskets. Well, he's also the guy that made the ambulance run and saw the weird debris in the back of the ambulance. Well, at some point, he comes back to deliver the caskets, pulls up to hangar 18 as instructed, but it's surrounded by MPs. After the delivery, he spots a nurse friend, makes plans for lunch, and while they're eating, she sketches what she'd seen. A figure on a table, large head with slit mouth and eyes, but she warns him, we can't talk about this anymore. If we do, we are both gone. As the story goes, that nurse vanishes soon after that day. Now, I do have to note that as awesome of a story as that is, I think this one's really just a story. No one has ever been able to track down the missing nurse. And if you think about it, there are already so many leaks in the security colander. Why would they bother to take out a nurse when there's about a jillion other people who've seen the same thing? Anyway, we also have Melvin Brown, a 25-year-old MP and occasional cook at the base, who drew guard duty at both Blackwater and Hangar 84 from July 5th through the 7th. At the impact site on the 5th, he helped secure the perimeter, stealing peeks under tarps draped over the bodies during loading. Later, at the hangar, he stood post while crates were prepped, catching another look through a gap. Brown kept quiet for years, but his daughter Beverly coaxed the story out of him in the 1980s after Roswell tales resurfaced in the news. He called them little people from somewhere else. Walter Haut, the public information officer who'd written that fateful press release, released a sworn affidavit after his death in 2005. In that affidavit, he says on July 6th, Colonel Blanchard pulled him into Hangar 84 for a private viewing to see what we'd stirred up with the announcement. Inside, under guard, sat the egg-shaped craft, 15 feet long and dented but whole, with 2 bodies under a canvas tarp nearby. Child size, but with disproportionately large heads and dark almond-shaped eyes. Their skin was gray, suits metallic, and form-fitting. So, plenty of people saw the wreckage, and plenty of people saw the bodies. And if you're the Army, you have a problem. How exactly do you contain this many leaks? Answer: brute force. The Army goes on a terror campaign threatening anyone and everyone. Now, Roswell was about as patriotic of a town as you could get, but half of its population was tied to the bases. During the war, everyone saves every tin can and even scrape the foil from the back of gun wrappers to contribute to the war effort. They, for the most part, are already on board. But the military's methods went beyond appeals to duty. They tapped fear tailored to the target. Threats of court-martials and Leavenworth for the military, visceral home invasions for civilians. The result? It worked. Stories simmered for 30 to 50 years, bubbling up only on deathbeds or in quiet conversations with those already in the know. Remember Dennis, the ambulance driving mortician? Remember what they told him? That if he opens his mouth, they'll be picking his bones out of the sand. And as just a little aside, I just happened to be besties with a guy who was a reporter for the Roswell Daily Record for a couple of years in the early 90s. My friend actually interviewed the son of the funeral home owner, Mr. Ballard, who was a teenager at the time of the crash, about something else. But after the notebook was closed, so to speak, the two had a conversation about that casket delivery. Mr. Ballard Jr. confirmed not only did the delivery happen, but his father got a check from the U.S. government for about 10 times what the caskets were worth. That's some serious hush money. Oh, and they threatened his dad to keep quiet too. I have no idea what the threat was, but Jr. says it worked. They never talked about it again. Sheriff Wilcox and his family are threatened as well. His granddaughter, Barbara Duggar, told the story given to her by her grandmother, so George's wife. She said George was told that if he blabbed, it would not just be the end for him, but for his wife and daughters too. And don't forget about poor Mac Brazel and his 4-day ordeal. Word has it that this once happy, outgoing, talkative guy was never the same after that. He withdrew from the world and stayed there. Jesse Marcel got the hint before that press conference when he's told, "This is the cover. Balloon story. No deviations. One wrong word and your career's ash." To his son, they were a little nicer, just telling him, "Don't talk about this with friends, ever." Debriefs in Hangar 84 on July 8th and 9th rounded up crews in small batches, giving them stern lectures on classification levels with treason penalties spelled out in black and white. And don't forget the threat from the FCC to pull the license of KGFL radio, which was then followed up by a call to Walt Whitmore from one Senator David Chavez, the U.S. Senator from New Mexico, telling him to think of the greater good and advise his team accordingly. Kinda sounds like a threat to me. Fire and deputy teams got the speeches before they even left the sites. Then a wave of house calls in the 4 to 5 days post-crash delivered the family harm ultimatum to anyone who'd wandered too close. One unnamed deputy recalled a visit where an officer laid out photos of accidents in the desert, empty cars, no drivers, just as a visual aid. But I think the most terrifying account of them all is that of Frankie Rowe. On July 8th, a black military sedan rolls up outside their house. There's a knock at the door, and Frankie, with her mom right next to her, opens the door to see two gentlemen. The first one asks for the girl from the fire station. Frankie says, "That's me." They move to the dining room, mother at one end of the table and Frankie to her side, and the officer standing across like a judge. His partner has gone out back to watch the kids in the backyard and make sure they stay outside. The officer says, "I understand you were at the station the other day." Frankie says, "Yeah, I was." He comes back with, "No, you weren't. You didn't see anything. You didn't hear any conversation." Well, Frankie, she was raised never to lie, so she pushes back and says, "Yeah, I was there. I touched a piece of that stuff." Realizing he's not getting through to her, he pulls out his baton and starts slapping it on his hand. "You were never there. Do you understand? If you can't grasp this, there are things we can do." He turns to Frankie's mother and says, "Can she keep a secret?" Frankie's mom says, "Yeah, just tell her what you want." He looks back at Frankie and says, "If you ever talk about this the rest of your life, we can take your whole family, take the kids to the German POW camp at Orchard Park, and your parents to the Japanese one in Artesia. Or we don't even need camps."
He said, "We'd put you in one, we'd put your parents in the other one, but we don't have to do that." He said, "We could take you out here in the middle of this desert." He said, "No one will ever find your bodies, ever. No one will ever know what happened to you."
The nightmare lasted about 45 minutes to an hour, and Frankie finally tells the man she won't say anything to anybody. Her mom sends her to her room at that point, and Frankie has no idea what her mom said to him after that. But the topic died in that house that day. It wasn't resurrected until researchers knocked on her door in 1989. Her sister corroborates both listening to their dad's excitement when he told them about the creatures he saw in the desert and the visit from the men a few days later. So, thanks to tactics like this, it worked like a charm. Roswell's grapevine dried up, stories falling into whispers shared only with spouses or on deathbeds. Now, after all of that, let's take a moment to go down an amazingly crazy rabbit hole. According to Nick Redfern, writing in 2015 for the Mysterious Universe website and referencing a partially declassified FBI report called Bacteriological Warfare in the United States, the plague broke out around Lincoln County, which is where the debris field is, which is right next to Roswell, with cases reported from 1947 to 1950. It didn't affect too many people, but a couple of people died. According to Nick, the report implies that the powers that be were concerned that this was not a naturally occurring event, that it was instead something introduced and spread on purpose, potentially by foreign actors. Now, stick with me here. I know this is crazy town territory, but when I read that, the first thing I thought of was that maybe somebody decided this would be the perfect way to try and decrease the number of potential future whistleblowers. Aw, Carol Ann, that's a terrible thing to say about your government. Well, they've done worse. Don't get me wrong, I love this country and I love our military. But we have been known to make some pretty boneheaded moves in the past. Just throwing it out there. Anyway, back to the story. Now, of course, some of these eyewitness accounts are not without their problems. Take Major Jesse Marcel Sr., the guy we all know from those famous weather balloon photos. Well, he decided it was time to set the record straight when Stanton Friedman called him for an interview. However, his testimony comes into question because of some of the weird things he said later on in life, like he was a pilot with combat experience, which he never was. But then we also have the testimony of Jesse's son, Jesse Jr. He says he touched the stuff too and backs up his dad's account. But then we also have Melvin Brown, who said he saw the bodies twice while he was on guard duty. Except he wasn't a guard. He was a cook. Cooks don't typically guard top secret halls. But maybe things were crazy with everything going on and people got their duties shifted around. Then there's Walter Haut's interview in 2000 where he was a little fuzzy on the specifics. But the affidavit he released upon his death in 2005, notarized and witnessed, including a doctor's statement that he was of sound mind, was clear and detailed. But one little hitch. UFO researchers helped draft it based on their prior conversations, which Haut reviewed and signed without changes. Does the fact that he didn't write it himself change anything? Some people seem to think so. But let's not forget that there are problems with the official story as well. And there are new things still happening. For example, look again at the balloon wreckage press conference photo. See the note in General Ramey's hand. People have been trying to enlarge the photo to try and figure out the words for a long time. But as digital technology gets better and better, efforts are still ongoing to try and figure out what it says. Right now, we can see words like disc, victims, misstate the meaning of the story. I mean, I don't think it's out of the question that as technology gets better, that little memo might become a pretty important clue. And the third guy in the room for that infamous photo, Ramey's right-hand man, Thomas Dubose, came out in 1991 to say, yeah, the stuff on the ground in that picture is totally fake. The real stuff went to DC. Of course, the last question is, what happened to the bodies? Well, apparently they were crated and flown out under tarps. Some say they went to Fort Worth and on to Wright-Patterson in Ohio. Some say they went straight to Washington, D.C., and some say the bodies went a few different places. There's an account of a March 1950 FBI memo from Agent Guy Hoddle to Director Hoover describing 3 flying saucers recovered in New Mexico, each about 50 feet in diameter with raised centers, occupied by 3 3-foot-tall humanoids in metallic cloth of fine texture. An account sourced from an Air Force investigator, but dismissed as hearsay at the time. And then there are the persistent rumors of a survivor. A 1972 whistleblower claimed one entity, given the designation EBEN-1, was held at Los Alamos until 1952, communicating through simple drawings and telepathic impressions before being repatriated via some interstellar arrangements. Now, for those of you who've been sticking around for that little something extra, it has to do with the town of Roswell itself. It's weird. That bestie I mentioned earlier that spent a couple of years there as a reporter for the Roswell Daily Record couldn't wait to get a new job anywhere else. To him, the whole place just had this weird vibe. It was just an accepted fact that strange things were a regular occurrence there. He himself witnessed mysterious things zipping around the night sky all the time. And he also said that everyone who's lived there their whole lives knows that what happened in 1947 is true. They just don't say it out loud. And half the people there believe the aliens have come back to live there. A hiding in plain sight kind of strategy. And he told me this interesting story. Let's go back a bit to set the scene. Roswell Army Airfield, which then became Roswell Air Force Base, which then became Walker Air Force Base, which then closed June 30th of 1967, left poor Roswell without the only real source of income they'd had for decades. Well, the answer to their prayers came along sometime in the 80s. Japan, not known for its sprawling landscapes, needed someplace big with runways where Japan Airlines could train its pilots. And the long shuttered airbase seemed to fit the bill. Perfect! Except 18 months later, they packed up and left, mumbling something about their equipment never working quite right. Was it because they just couldn't get used to living in a city that was actively leaning into the tourist dollars starting to come their way as the story of 1947's events became mainstream? Or was it that the inherent weirdness really did mess with their equipment to the point where they just had to leave? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? So, is Roswell too weird? Not at all. I don't mean to dunk on them. After all, it is the hometown of John Denver, Demi Moore, and Priscilla Presley. And they honored Stanton Friedman posthumously in 2022 with a star on its International UFO Museum Walk of Fame. But the question is, did the weirdness start because of what happened there in 1947? Or was something beyond our imagination attracted to the weirdness already there? My friend assures me that everyone there has a story to tell, but only after you close the notebook. Woo, Nelly! That was a marathon, but I hope you enjoyed our little trip down Alien Lane. This is just the start of your weirdness travels for today. Go ahead and click right here for your next destination. It's worth it, I promise. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.